So I started my journey early on, but it's easy for me because I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So over there, do I look like him? So my great-great-grandfather, he was an entrepreneur. And I'll tell you why he was an entrepreneur, and maybe it will help you understand a bit how I divide the terminology of what it is to become an entrepreneur. Because not necessarily to be entrepreneur meaning to start your own company. Being entrepreneur, it's also working in your company and making changes or making decisions or creating new projects. So my great-grandfather lived in Jerusalem, and they didn't have a print machine. So what did he do? He wanted to print a newspaper in Hebrew. There was no newspapers in Hebrew. So he went to Vienna and convinced the Tsar, which was the ruler of Austria, to give him money to buy the printing machine. Then he brought the printing machine, started the newspaper. Again, he had a lot of other things that he was doing, but it kind of comes with the family. So obviously, I started my journey very early on. I started making businesses when I was 14, building computers. When I was young, people did not know how to use a computer, so we would take computers, assemble them, and teach people how to use the computer. And obviously, an important part is the next generation, and that's my son. When he was, I miss him already. When he was 6, he built a robot, and he presented that in a conference in Israel. And you can see he was working on that in his pajamas and working very hard during the night. So first, as an entrepreneur, you want to understand what are the mechanics, what moves the technology, what moves the atmosphere. So you can see that there is again, this is in my perspective, and mainly it's derivative of AI and machine learning, but it also applies to other things. So one thing that we see is there are 3 catalysts for adapting to technology. One is the data side, and the data is something that we're generating all the time. I mean, it's people that are taking pictures now, or putting your phone, recording things, sending text messages. You're generating data. That data can become useful, especially when we look at enterprises or when we look at factories. The second part is hardware. As more computation, Intel had, they called them Moore's Law. Moore's Law meaning that every year the computation power almost doubled itself every 2 years. And now, basically, it's starting to wind down and be a little bit more spacey than actually every 2 years. But the hardware, the fact that since the last decade, the amount of processing changed dramatically, created new opportunities. Last is new algorithms that come in that make the computation much more efficient. So if we look at that triangle and we try to understand what are the changes, what brings, so tomorrow you wanna do something, you wanna understand how these things are affecting. So when I would go over in the domain later on in the presentation, I would go and explain to you why I selected these topics and how these 3 affected these topics. I think that the most important part in this era or in the next 5 years or 10 years would be the data. The data is the leap, and there is constantly growing amount of data. It's basically exploding. We generate more and more and more data. Today, even a car that drives with a camera and sensors generate gigabytes and terabytes of data every minute, every second. And that needs to be processed. And the great opportunity is that the data is unstructured. Unstructured meaning that a computer cannot understand what the data means. So if I'm talking to a person and I'm telling the person, hello, how are you? A person understands that you is the person I'm referring to. The computer needs to explain, we need to explain that. So we need to, first of all, divide it into entities, divide it to words, understand what are the word meaning, the sentence, and then understand the context. That again, this is a very abstract explanation of what it means to structure the data. If you take an image of me here on the stage, you would see a person with a suit that gained some weight here with the great food in Guatemala, and a screen, maybe chairs in the back. That would be structured data because it will have the annotation, it will have the explanation to a computer what's in the image. And this is, and again, you can see that most of the data is unstructured, meaning that there is no, it's not set in a table, it's not set in a computer can process it. And so this is a great opportunity, by the way, to those of you who are planning to be a data analyst or data scientists or work with data, to process the data it will be a major opportunity. Now, when I'm looking at innovation, and I had the opportunity of being the head of Intel Mobile and Wireless Innovation for a couple of years. And one of the things I had to evaluate is not only evaluate external companies, but also internal companies. And I wanted, basically, I was asked almost on a daily basis to understand if we should do a project or not do a project, and allocate resources or not allocate resources. It goes for also the startups or innovation that I've done internally. And I came up with kind of how do I make a decision if it's worthwhile to pursue a project or not to pursue a project. And the reason it's important because at the end, there is a lot of things that are related to what do we do and when do we do it and how do we do it. And I'll explain every one of these pointy parts of the triangle. So I think that the first thing is, again, the innovation. It's in the center, and this is what we want to do. And I think the most important part is the top one, is funding. Can it be funded? What does it mean, can it be funded? It means that not necessarily we need to go to a VC and ask the VC for money. Sometimes funding can come from government, it can come from grants, it can come from maybe the rolling or operation of the business. It can also come from incentives that can be generated by the community. For example, doing crowdfunding. So the funding is important because we need to look at the innovation and see, can it be funded? Can we find the resources? Will someone give us the money or the resources in order to do that? Because funding, not necessarily, I used resources and not money, because sometimes you don't actually need money, you need resources. Meaning that, for example, if you want to do a project and a company gives you 10 engineers, then you don't really need money because the engineers will create the project. The second part, when we want to analyze it, is scaling. What is scaling? Scaling meaning that in difference between opening a store or doing something that is a singleton in our timeline, meaning that we do something that is unique and in one time. Scaling means that we can copy it to other cities in where we're doing it, or other geographies, other countries, and other languages. And when we look at an innovation, we want to make sure, or we want to look at good innovation or things that have more impact or exponential impact, things that we can scale. In Intel, they use the term copy exactly, meaning that they take a factory or they take an idea, and basically they copy the factory exactly to another location, to the point of the handles in the bathroom. So it would look exactly the same way. So if you train employees, you can basically move them from one place to another. This is how they scale their production. But it can go, for example, a company, the next speaker is from Uber, or the last speaker is from Uber, and they also scale. They take the same technology, the same platform, and they move it from one location to another. There is small, minor adaptation that needs to be done in every place, but overall, there is a lot of utilization from one place to another. The last part is also related to timing, is the market. Is the market right to do that? Sometimes we try to solve problems that do not need to be solved. And I gave a few examples of that on a few talks that I've done here in the university. And I think that one important part is, for example, when you look at the industry of logistics, and there's a company doing sensors for transferring equipment or medicines from one point to another. The person who's sending the medicine doesn't care if it goes bad in the middle, right? Because the insurance company would give him the money. The person who was receiving it doesn't care if it goes bad in the middle because the insurance company will give him the money. The people that are moving the products, it's multiple of companies because it moves from the airline to the trucking company. They don't want to have the sensors because they don't want to be blamed in the fact that the shipment is ruined. So overall, nobody actually wants to solve the problem of is the shipment is ruined and how to utilize it, because the entire ecosystem gains from that. Us as customers, because then the insurance rate rolls down to our pockets. But at the end of the day, the person who makes the decision doesn't care if we solve the problem or not. So it's important to understand not only if the market exists, because definitely shipment or supply chain is a huge market. Not everything needs to be solved. And again, that problem doesn't necessarily needs to be solved. So when we look at innovation, basically what I do is I take the idea and then analyze it by these 3 criteria. And now the other thing that I do is I look at, and I mentioned the market, and also I'm using a lot of reports, and I want to start maybe drilling down into what is the opportunity that exists today, and where should you invest? And one of the things that you can see, basically the explosion of data, and AI and machine learning, they need data. The more data that you have, the more efficient and more accurate your algorithms are. And the more accurate your algorithms are, the better your results are better. So whoever holds the data is basically the new gold or the new oil of the AI or machine learning age. And one of the things that is interesting, and again, I took this report. It's a report done by McKinsey, and what you can see here. That in almost 10 years, there will be a huge gap in productivity between companies that adapt machine learning and AI and companies that do not. And that gap, basically, if you do not start implementing today and optimizing today with production, you will be left out of the market. So you'll have a gap that is so big that even if you decide in 2025, you decide that you want to start doing something, not necessarily you will be able to gain with the competition that has started earlier on. And the reason that I'm saying it, because it's very important to understand these opportunities. Because if we look 10 years ago, most of the technology opportunities did not exist outside of the technology or IT business. And today, technology affects farms, it affects taxi companies, it affects financial institutes, it affects everyone, not only IT. So the digital, basically the IoT and the penetration of smart devices into our life is generating an opportunity where traditional markets now are shifting and changing. And with that, I wanted to explain one of the things that, another thing that when we look into investment is what's happening in the market. So we look at exit multipliers. Exit multipliers is basically how the company stock reacts or in the exit. So first of all, how much time does it take? And then what is the multiplier? Meaning that as an investor, how much money did I make? Okay, so you kind of need to ignore the dips because sometimes there are really big acquisitions in Israel. There are companies that are being acquired for billions of dollars, and then it kind of shifts the graph a bit. But overall, you can see that it's averaging to about multiplier of 5, x5, 5x, meaning that whoever invested in a company made 5x. So when I'm looking and analyzing, if I want to invest in a certain domain or certain company, that would be a good indicator for me because I can understand that my multiplier would be somewhere between 2 to 7, okay? Meaning that if I'm investing in a multiplier that is higher than 7, I'm taking a risk. And if I'm investing in a multiplier that is lower, then maybe I'm doing a good deal. And cybersecurity, you can see it varies from 3 or 4 to up to 15, almost 15x on the money that you put in. Another important indicator is the time to exit, because the multiplier is one indication, but if a company takes 14 years or 20 years to exit, then even if I made 10x, still it's 10 years, so it's not that much overall. So you can see that, first of all, the time to exit is narrowing down, meaning that the market is getting to be very aggressive. So a lot of companies come and try to buy companies. This is a good indicator. And then you can see that in average, in fintech, it takes 5 years, almost 5 years to sell a company. And in 2014, it took almost 13 years in order to sell a fintech company. And what do you guys think that means? That should I invest in fintech or not? Well, yes, if the trend continues, right? But sometimes, when you see dips like that, the following years, it starts to stretch back. Because right now, what happened, if you remember what I showed you, there is a lot of data, AI, machine learning, fraud detection, digital banking. There was a huge impact on fintech. Will it continue? My assumption that it will. I'm not stealing my thunder because in the next slide I'm going to talk about it. But in fintech, I do assume that this will continue because there is a lot of innovation that is penetrating the financial market. But the reason that it's happening is because the financial industry is based on data. And a lot of numbers and AI and machine learning are good for a lot of data. And I think that this is one of the most important parts. Again, if you want to do investments or you want to choose the domain that you want to go into, I'm now going to go over and explain how the effects of hardware and data and algorithms are affecting each one of these verticals. And again, after that, I'm going to, this is the kind of a very broad overview, and then I'm going to deep dive into basically what I see as a growth opportunities. So I'll start with the consumer side, which you have the chatbots and virtual assistants. There is a huge effect of AI, and it will continue to grow. And today when you talk to Google or Siri, it not necessarily works well, right? I mean, it gets us so-and-so. By the way, in lab today, computers do better to analyze our voice than other humans, which is great. And I think that eventually it will get to a point where it will become very efficient. So a lot of the activities that we do will be voice-oriented. And the smart assistant is important because it makes us more productive. Because if I, 5 years ago, had to go in, set my alarm clock, so I need to go find the application and set the time. Today, I use an iPhone, so I said, Siri, set a wake-up time at 5 a.m. That's it, done. And so far it never failed. Okay, so it's an increase in our personal productivity. But if you think about it, when we look at the businesses, it will increase employees' productivity as well, as these assistants will be incorporated into call centers. They can have certain words that queue up and pull up menus, or to someone that is receiving or working with customers or facing customers. This can be also an opportunity to personalize your experience. And of course, there is the augmented reality, robots, and there is a small opportunity that I put it in the consumer side, which is privacy. And privacy is important to us, not because hopefully I'm not doing anything wrong, but if you are, then you have something to hide. But privacy is not only for us to hide things or things that we want to keep discreet. Lack of privacy today with big data means that we are not able to choose the things that we want to, because we can be influenced and be affected. Because the algorithms can, basically what Facebook does is, or Google or any other company that uses big data, what they do is basically they are planning the algorithm such that you will be attracted and staying inside the platform. It will be addictive. And it's addictive because it's analyzing your personal information and your preferences. And this is where privacy comes into place, because the fact that they have these amount of data makes them, and again, we are all, by the way, we are all very predictable. And they're not listening to your phones. It's almost impossible to listen to everyone's phones. But what they do is they run really good data analytics, and we are very predictable as humans. So privacy is, we're losing the privacy, meaning we lose the right to choose. And I think that as that awareness grows in the market, we'll see more and more companies offering digital privacy services. It will be incorporated in other services, so it will not be. It's not like antiviruses where you go and buy antivirus or you buy privacy package. It will come out as part of the product. It will be incorporated into product differentiation. The other part is health. I think that there's a lot of data, digital health, the DNA, preventive medicine, meaning that we can prevent diseases before they happen. So it's a huge market. It's an industry heavily affected by data, but also affected by the new hardwares. So why do I say new hardwares? Because the fact that we can analyze X-ray and we can analyze MRIs and we can transfer it to a doctor that is in the US from the middle of the jungles. It has a tremendous effect. And it's thanks to, first of all, a lot of new hardware that is able to develop that, and also the security and the trust that we have in these mechanisms. The financial industry, obviously, we talked about it a bit. Two things that it's important to understand. One is the entire blockchain. I didn't specifically put blockchain here because blockchain is a technology, and it's more of incorporated inside the economy. It's a tool. The effect of blockchain can be on retail and health. One of the companies I'm working now is they do DNA analysis over blockchain. So not necessarily I put blockchain in financial. And when we look at the financial industry, obviously there is a lot of innovation, unbanked population, especially in Latin America. There is a lot of opportunity to do with fintech and financials, because today you don't need storefront, you don't need the tellers. You can have very low cost engagement with customers. That will lead eventually to the fact that you can offer now services to the unbanked population. And there's a long tail with that population, and there's a lot of money that population offers. The other part is the retail, the shipping, supply chain, loyalty, government, so safety, data, smart cities, resources, environment with energy. I think that I'll focus maybe in smart grid, our ability to decide to which type of energy we're utilizing. And let me go to something that is highly relevant to you guys here in Guatemala City. It's a beautiful city and a beautiful country, but it has one problem that I came to know driving from here last night. It took me 1 hour and 40 minutes for 4 kilometers. Right? Yeah, okay. So there are people here that can testify that were with me in the car. So 4 kilometers, walking would have been much faster. So, mobility definitely is an opportunity. So why do I say Guatemala has a unique opportunity with mobility? Because instead of utilizing old infrastructure, now you can apply autonomous vehicle routes along the city and create public transportation without digging subways and without putting on rails and to create mass transportation. So basically, you can use this technology in order to solve problems that you could not solve before, and do it without immense infrastructure toll. So when we look at the mobility also has an effect on our air travel, and obviously there is something that I see that I removed from what we have here, which is the space, because I see it as part of the mobility, the space era. It's really relevant to Guatemala because a lot of the country is not covered with sensors or cameras. In Israel, you don't have a lot of free areas that are not covered with cell phone, or you don't have cell phone reception. Most of the area, you have cameras or satellites covering it. The fact that you will have microsatellites will create a paradigm shift, especially for big countries or big farms, because microsatellites are very cheap, and you can basically send a cluster of them to space, and then you now can serve South America, Africa, and Asia with the same hardware. So I think that space can be a huge opportunity, and I think that if I were you, I think that it's something that definitely you can pursue. Industry, I think that we kind of covered that a bit. I want to touch the media part, because there is a paradigm shift now that is happening with media. The paradigm shift is very similar to what happened with newspapers and websites. Because if in previous media production, you had a production company selling it to the network, now the network become the producer as well. Netflix, for example, it's direct to the customer. Customers have voting. They can view whatever they want, whenever they want. There is a shift in the way that we consume media and the way that we want to see our series ending. Because, for example, spoiler alert for Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones ending, I was not very happy with the way it ended, as most of you are here. But you know what people try to do? They try to actually create a voting to influence it, to make them produce their ending that we as fans wanted. And I think that it's a signal to a shift that will happen. How do you utilize it? I'll leave it to you to be creative and think about solutions. And now, I talked about the industries, but it's also important not to only understand how it will impact the industry, or what is the size of the industry. So you see that the largest industry that will be affected is travel. Travel, 128%, this is what they predict that there are uses where AI can improve or create impact. But on the other hand, retail is much larger. So retail is $1.7 trillion, and that will be affected by almost 90%. And I think that effect is significant, because if you want to bet, you bet on retail because it's a larger industry. Not necessarily, it depends on the innovation, but it's important also to look at the market size. Now, I told you that I'll tell you what my kind of big things are. I'm stating the obvious, which is AI and machine learning, and cybersecurity. Now, why am I saying cybersecurity? Because more data that we have, the more that these computers penetrate our day-to-day life, the more we need cybersecurity, the more risks that we have. And so as the attackers are making their methods more sophisticated, and the more that we need more protection, the more that it penetrates our life, the more that we are at risk. So cybersecurity is going to continue to grow exponentially. So it doesn't matter kind of what you do in cybersecurity, it will grow. Another big bet is food technology. Food technology, because there is one thing that we always need, right? We need food. We cannot live without food. World population is growing. You can understand that market will grow no matter what. So, if you wanna put some bets, I think food tech would be a major, one of the major things, and of course, the environmental effect, because we start to understand the impact that we have. So if you solve environmental issues, it has impact on the economy and impact on the solutions that you offer. So that's kind of my personal kind of bet, and later on, if you want to ask questions regarding that, I can emphasize or can put a bit more, shed a little bit more light on why I think these items would be more significant than others, especially with mobility. And again, mobility, not necessarily I mean the autonomous vehicle, because it's a crowded market, and I would not recommend for you to start developing an autonomous vehicle, because you know what, other will do it first, so they'll do it faster, and you have no advantage doing it. But if you look at the impact that mobility, for example, will have, parking lot. Now that I have autonomous vehicle, why do I need parking lots? Okay, I don't need parking lots because the car can go back home and come to pick me up when I'm done. I don't need so. How do we change the urban lifestyle now that we don't need necessarily to have cars park on the street side or in parking lots? It's a change. How does it affect? I don't know. Media consumption in the car. Now we need to drive, but now when we don't need to drive, we do want to do something else, right? Or maybe we want to watch a movie. Maybe we want to have maybe acoustic solutions for car to kind of create a movie theater inside the car while you move. Again, I'm throwing things that may be a result of a paradigm shift in mobility. And now I want to touch a bit on what trades entrepreneurs need. Because when you look and you want to do your innovation, what do you need to have in order to be successful? And I'll give you 5 trades that I think that are important when you look at innovation. And when I look at the team, I'm trying to find these traits in the founders or in the team. Not each one of the founders need to have everything, but you want to see that there is a mix. So the first thing is tenacity. And over here you can see that this is a view on the Ramon crater in Israel. And I don't live there, just it's an area in Israel. You can see that there is a small stream over there in the middle. It's called the Ramon River, surprise. This crater is basically like the Grand Canyon, a small stream of water, basically carved an entire mountain and collapsed the entire mountain. And tenacity is the ability for us to create a shift. So even if a small stream can move a mountain, so we need to be persistent, we need to continue our path, and eventually we'll drag the entire mountain away. The other part is elasticity. This is elasticity, meaning that you can bounce back as well. So you need to be flexible, but not to lose your way. Okay, and this is the Yarkon River. Yarkon River, basically, it's stretched from where it starts to where it ends, 14 kilometers. I know in the Latin America, it's not even. I think you open your tap, this is kind of what you get, or your shower. But the length, if you walk aside the bank, the length of it is almost double. And the reason that I'm saying it is because what happened, it got to a block, the water got to a block, and they moved. Got to a block and moved. And this is, when you see entrepreneurs, this is how they need to treat it. If somebody closes the door, you go through the window. If somebody closes the window, you go through the chimney. If somebody closes the chimney, you break the wall, right? So the reason I'm emphasizing this because, and why I'm saying elasticity and not basically, be flexible, because you need to keep your eyes on the target. The water needs to get to the sea. You need to keep your eyes on the target and, make shifts and moves, but don't lose the sight of the target or where you want to go. And that's really important. Action, this is something that we tend not to want to take actions because if we take an action, we can make a mistake. So many times we are in face of making a decision or doing something or saying something, we don't do it because we're afraid that we will make a mistake. So my advice here, first of all, is make a mistake. And if you make mistakes, you almost cannot fail because you made the decision, you understand the risk, you mitigate for these risks, and you can change. The last is learn all the time, and it's part of the actions that you need to take. Good entrepreneurs and good people that create innovation learn all the time. I read books constantly. I read articles from universities. I read reports, and I consume mountains of data every week. The reason that I do that is because it's important to keep learning. If 10 years ago you could finish architect school and that's it, today you need to keep on learning because architects have new techniques, new materials, and if you don't keep up to date, you lose your battle. So it's really important to keep on learning and make your decisions, get to a yes or a no. Last is understand the market. Understanding if it's a problem that we want to solve or not. What is the right time to launch? Not always. A lot of companies fail because they either prematurely launch it, so the market is not ready yet. So sometimes it's good to have kind of test balloons to see if the market is ready, if we get good traction. And as an investor, it's also important to see that the company generates traction from the audience. So getting 500 people on your application is not traction. Getting 1 million is traction. And so that's one of the reasons that you need to understand, because many entrepreneurs come and they say, yes, they're very happy. They come to me and they say, we have 10,000 applications installed. Which is, if you think about it, for an application, it's not a lot. It's not much. Depends on what period of time. And then you want to see the accumulation. But, if I write an application and you write some flashlight, blinking light, you'll get 10,000 downloads. And so it's very important to understand what is traction with your market. Okay? If the traction can be B2B, B2B to C, B2C, okay, so business to business, business to customer, and understand the network, understand the influence. How do you get to certain locations? It's really important. A good example, if somebody in the market is selling watermelons for 10 shekels, shekel is the currency in Israel, and somebody next to it selling watermelons for 5 shekels, which is half, you know what? I'll go to the one that sells it for 5, not the one that selling it for 10 shekels, right? So what can the guy that's selling it for 10 shekels do? He can say that they are healthier, or maybe they're organic, but he needs to find something that differentiates him. And this is understanding the market. And it goes to products, and it goes to other domains of our life. You need to understand what your customer wants and how you present that. So the last, I promised you 5. I covered 4. And there is a hidden one, but as I said, it's something that is so important that it's integrated into it, which is the team. So you can see the first letter of every one of the traits that I said is basically spells the word team, because the team is important. Again, not everyone needs to have all the traits. I mean, there are superstars. There are the Elon Musk or Steve Jobs of the world that have everything. They make decisions, they're creative, they understand the market. But sometimes with good partnerships and good understanding, you can cover that gap.
Thank you, Roy. Hey.
Thank you.
Gracias.